Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I have an opportunity to work on one of the bait runners that Mike sent in. This is a Penn Fierce III. It's the 8000 live liner. We're going to show you how the reel is serviced today. We're going to take it apart. We're going to fully service the reel. And if you have one of these, by the end of the video, you should be able to learn how to do it yourself. That's kind of the whole idea behind Second Chance is to show you how to give your reels a second chance. These reels have been used pretty heavily. We can see there's a lot of film on here. This is the current edition of the Fierce live liner setup. It's used for chunking baits and also for floating live baits like bunkers and the like. And well, let's get started. We're going to get started by taking off the exterior parts. That starts with the handle. You can also remove our spool. And while I'm doing this, I want to encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you like the art of fishing reel service and repair. If you like to learn about fishing reels, their manufacture, and well, how to service them and keep them running for a long time, this is a good channel for you, and I would encourage you to subscribe. And if you do subscribe, please use that notification button. We're just walking that drag adjuster knob up. I'm going to set those two pieces off to the side. They're big enough that I don't need to keep too close a control on them. I'll find them if I misplace them. There is some sand under here, so you do want to make sure that as you're doing your service that you can take all of that sand and make sure that it doesn't get into the reel. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut the camera off for a second. I'm going to just flush that with some fresh water before we continue. Well, I just flushed it with regular tap water. Just went over to the sink and flushed it out. There was a lot of sand underneath here as well. And you'll notice this has a slotted spool. Well, a slotted spool is there to let water out, but sometimes it lets things in. And that's probably the case. We mentioned that there was some film on that spool, so before I go too much further, I'm just going to use some rod and reel cleaner and a kitchen scrubby pad. See if we can't clean that up a little bit. A lot of what we want to do in terms of servicing a reel is take the reel apart, inspect it, clean out the old greases and oils, clean up the reel, replace any worn pieces and parts, and well, just reassemble it and let it go for another year or so. While I'm at it, I did talk to Mike. I asked Mike about the reel and as he had service on it and the like, and one of the things I had asked him about was the drag washers, and he said didn't know. So let's take a look at the drag washers. Doesn't matter where you start and where you finish your service in terms of what order you do them in, and normally I like to do the drag washers last, but because we're cleaning the spool up, we might as well just take a look at that now. To remove your drag washers, you remove the clip that sits in a groove inside here, and then you can pull the drag washers out. I'm noticing that these drag washers are the Penn HT100 drag washers, and that they're new format ones. They're the ones where the drag washer acts as an eared washer. It has the studs on the outside of it, and your metals are the ones that are just straight up circular in nature, and they act as the keyed washer. These are the HT100s. They don't require grease. These are in good condition. I told Mike I would check those, and if needed, replace. These are not needed. And let's just reassemble. Well, one of the things I'll show you here is that you can grease these washers. They're optional in terms of greasing, but let's take a look. I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to just take, in this case, I'm using Cal's Universal Drag Grease. Put a little bit there. Use your glove as a tool, and also to keep the grease off of you. And then you want to wipe off any excess after you wipe the grease into those washers. I guess since I'm doing it on the first, on the second, I might as well do it on the first as well. Keep that consistent. So we'll show you again. A little bit of grease on there. Use your glove to wipe it in. You need to see the cross hatching on these when you're done greasing. If you can't see that cross hatching, you've put too much grease on. Go ahead and wipe it off. So we alternate the fabric washers. That's the second one I greased. With the metals. You should start with a fabric, finish with a metal. This is your second metal. A little bit of water still on that one from the rinse off. And we'll do it one more time just to, again, show it to you. Wipe it in. If it's too much, wipe it off. Alright, and that spool is ready to go fishing again. I'm just going to get that out of the way. Kind of an unusual approach in terms of first rather than last, but that's okay. Alright, set that aside. The spool has been serviced. Drag washers are ready to go. We're going to next approach the case then. A couple of things to note on this. You got a lot of screws on the outside, but this screw that's holding on the trip lever arm, I find it best not to remove that screw because that'll hold your assembly in place. You want to remove the arm on this side. There is a small screw that's attaching the two levers. So remove that. And when you take your pieces and parts out, have a strategy for what you're going to do with them. I use a parts tray, and this parts tray has 8 corners in it. And generally speaking, I rotate the corners to different sides so that I know where those belong. And well, when it comes time to reassemble, I know where to find them. I'm going to remove this side of the lever then. This is the one that does not have the screw in it. I'm going to leave the other side on, and you'll see when I take this side plate off why that makes sense to do that. One, it's not holding the case on, and two, it's a good way to keep that mechanism in place. Alright, I'm using a Phillips head screwdriver now. You can use the, I think it's called JDM, Japanese industry standard one for this. I just like the feel of the other one. And you will note that Penn does use a little bit of the cool Loctite on these screws, and they also have a little plastic washer up on the top. It's transparent, so you won't necessarily see it, but it's right there. And the last thing I'm doing as I take this off is I'm laying these screws on the table to make sure that they're all the same size. Now, I've worked on these reels before. I know that these are all the same size screws, but if you don't know the reel, it's the first time you're working on one, then what you want to do is make sure that the screws are all the same size. If they're not, you want to make sure you mark where the ones are that are not. Using a utility knife just to separate the case. On this side, I can probably just pull up on this. But this has a case that comes off without removing the rotor. And here's your first look. So that screw on this side here is holding the post. That post holds the spring and the trip mechanisms. So, and a lot of sand there too. So this reel's been in the surf or on the beach. We'll get that off too. You do want to make sure as you're doing this that you take pictures as you progress. Now I'm using a video camera to take some pictures here, not only just to show you how to do it, but also if I get lost, that's a good place to go back and say, what did it look like? But this is a good thing. You're not going to take this off unless you have something that's broken inside. This is your trip mechanism. We'll leave it there so you can study that in case you've taken it all apart. And well, when you pull down on this, it's going to push down. Let's see if we can do this. It's going to push down on that lever right there. And it's going to pull this up. Now this is going to intersect with one of these blocks right here. You can see the tabs that are pulled up. There's 3 tabs that are pulled up. That's what's going to hit this little lever here and push everything back down. Like that to release. Okay. Just going to lay that off to the side. We could put some oil onto that mechanism. I don't grease that mechanism, but you can oil it. Alright, now let's move this down. We want to spin this around so that we can bring our anti-reverse, our crosswind block down to the lower position so that we can work on that. And we're going to remove the screw that's holding that block in. That's a very small screw, so pay attention to it. And this is a gate. You can just pull this up and off. You can see it's a series of 2 clips held in place. They're going to be a groove on the other side of that in the axle shaft that'll go back in. We'll show you that in a moment. When that's out, hold your crosswind block and just pull up on your axle shaft. When you're pulling up on your axle shaft, make sure it comes out nice and easy. If it's not coming out easy, it may be a bent axle shaft that will need to be replaced. These are the 2 grooves that we were talking about earlier. This clip is going to hold that groove in high and low of the crosswind block so that the axle shaft can intersect with that and go up and down as the stud on your crosswind gear, which is offset, moves this in and out. All right, we're going to remove the block next. And I like to clean the parts as soon as I take them off. It doesn't look like this wheel has been serviced since it left the factory. So it's a good time to take a look. You want to examine it for wear. You want to get the old greases out of there. And when it comes time to reassemble, we'll put new greases on there. That goes into my parts tray. We should be able to remove our main gear now. Yeah, so this has got the original greases in it. You can see the old greases have kind of come inside from the centrifugal force of spinning, and yeah, that grease is dirty, needs to be replaced. I use a variety of cleaning tools. In this case, I'm using a cotton swab to get the old greases off. You can see one very dirty paper towel underneath there that also gets used. And you just want to get the old greases out of there because they may be holding contaminants. We saw some sand on the front end of this wheel. If sand got into the case, well, it just acts as an abrasive, of course. You use sand and sandpaper, right? But those contaminants you do want to clear out so that they don't become abrasive and ruin the wheel. Well, this is the other side of that piece, and yeah, there's sand on that too. So the sand got trapped on the outside of it, but it's certainly there. I can feel it, and we want to make sure that we get that off. All right, one more little clean up in here. We're good with that. And between that bearing and the gear plate, there are 2 shim washers. The factory uses these shim washers to take out the side-to-side play that may be in that manufacturing process. There is always a little bit of variation, and well, you want to make sure that it doesn't have too much of a wobble, so they put their shims in there. All right, put that in on that side. Back end is clear. If you notice that there was any old greases trapped in the teeth, go ahead and take a hard bristle brush, pull through on those teeth. You want to inspect them for uniformity while you're doing that. Make sure that they're all the same, and then check this side as well. Make sure all the points are even, that there's no wear or warping going on in those. That goes into the parts tray. You can still see there's a lot of sand still here. I'm going to turn that towel over so I don't transfer that back. One more piece to remove on the lower case. That's the crosswind gear. You have a gear, a washer, and a screw. I'm just going to put them all back together, holding that screw. Check the teeth on this one. Same idea. If you find that there is some dirt in there, just pull it through. This one's clean. Inspect the teeth, make sure that they're all there, not missing. Alright, and then we got one more piece here, which is the rear drag assembly. This whole thing comes out in a pole, just like that. And we'll go into that in a little bit. I'm going to use some penetrating oil here just to clean the case. Do the same thing again. We've seen sand in and around the wheel, so you don't want to take any chances that there's some that are actually in here. You saw some on the bearing. And again, we'll just take a cotton swab, kind of clean up some of that stuff that's behind there. Down and about. Okay, one of the things you want to do if you're working on a reel like this and you're not familiar with it is go out to the internet and get the schematic for the reel. And I went to mysticparts.com. I pulled that schematic that gives me a guideline as to what I'm going to be working on, and it also tells me, in the event that I get stuck, the orientation and the sequencing of those parts, so that should something go amiss, I can get myself back on track. Alright, we removed the hold down screw for the collar for that rotor nut. That goes into my parts tray. This wrench usually does the trick. Yep. This comes off in a traditional counterclockwise manner. And if we've seen sand in the other places, there may be some sand under the rotor. And it does a little bit. So I'm going to turn the camera off one more time. I'm going to flush this off before we go any further. I've just returned. I flushed out the lower and the upper so that we no longer have sand. I also took the bearing out of the side case in the back here just to check that. We can put that back in. I'm going to I oil bearings, I don't grease them. And let's just set this aside for a moment. I can put that nut on there. Let's take a moment to check out the pinion gear stack, the anti-reverse and the like. This is a secondary anti-reverse. The primary is in here. It's a clutch. This is a secondary or a fail-safe. When you're reeling, it pulls that anti-reverse dog in. When you go to stop the reel, it pushes it out. And going out is going to intersect with the grooves on the inside of the rotor here. That just simply lifts off. And now we have the 3 screws underneath. Take a picture here. Sometimes these collars are different, and in this case it is different. You're going to notice that there's a flat side to this collar here. That's so that you can get the swing back on this anti-reverse dog. So when you go to reinstall, you want to make sure that that flat side is facing that anti-reverse dog so that you don't inhibit the swing. Trying to find the right screwdriver for this. There's 3 screws that attach. Of note on this is that you have a sealed bearing up top here, so that's different from the ones that we've seen inside the case. I also believe it's different than the one that's on the bottom. There's 2 bearings on this stack here, in between those, the clutch. The 3rd one. And this setup is fairly common for the Penn spinning reels of this generation. You're going to find the Fierce, the Pursuit, the Battle. They all kind of have this same setup here. So if you're working on one, you can probably work on the others. All right, I just want to. I'm going to leave these on the table rather than put these into the parts, because we're just going to service this and put it right back in. So with those 3 screws remaining, you should be able to pull up and out on that. We're going to do the same thing here. I just noticed there's a little bit of sand there I didn't get. Let's get that out of the way. I'm trying to do this off the table. That's probably why it's off camera. But I don't want that sand going back onto my table. Okay. Clean out the inner set. Clean out underneath. And let's take a look at that stack then. So the first one up is a sealed bearing that you have. It's in a carrier. Let me pop that out to show you. It's in a carrier. The carrier has a narrow side and a wide side. The wide side goes up. Bearing seats in there. Next up we have our anti-reverse clutch and the inner shield or the gear sleeve spacer. And as I was thinking, the bottom bearing is a different bearing. It's a shielded, not sealed bearing. And then we have our pinion gear. Just like we did with the other one, we want to take a moment here to clean the channels of that pinion gear. I'm going to use this one's a little grass brush. It doesn't have to be. You can use a toothbrush or anything. This happens to be the one I grabbed. Check all of the grooves inside to make sure they're clean. Check the ridges of the teeth to make sure they're uniform. And put that bearing back on. Since that is a shielded bearing, it will absorb the oil, so go ahead and oil that. Next up is our anti-reverse clutch mechanism. Every now and then I get questions that said my anti-reverse clutch is failing. Why is that? Most of the time it's because you have too much oil or grease on there. They shouldn't be greased. They're friction-driven devices, so just make sure they're clean. There's two sides to this. There's a plastic side and a metal side. Take a note of that when you take this off, because if you put it in upside down, it will not work properly. It'll make it like you can't turn your wheel and then you can only backpedal the wheel. Plastic side goes down. You notice that that sleeve extends beyond that clutch. That's why you have the indentation on this side. That whole assembly now is just about ready for reinstall. All we need to do here is just grease the pinion gear. I'm using Penn Precision wheel grease for this. It is a fishing wheel grease. Those of you that watch regularly know that I ask you to only use fishing wheel greases and oils. Stay away from the household varieties of everything else. Okay, that's all been greased up. We can reset that. Make sure that you're flush on the face of this. Remember what we said, there's a flat side to this collar. Make sure that that flat side aligns with your anti-reverse dog. And then we'll put this back in. Well, if you have any questions on this wheel, or any wheel, maybe you're working on one and you're stuck, if you leave that question in the comment section, I will try to answer that for you. Whether it's additional information that you're looking for, maybe it's a problem you're having with a wheel and you're trying to diagnose it. Maybe you've got one apart and something's not going back in properly. Whatever, I will try to help you out. That's the idea of the channel. It's to kind of pass on what I know so that you can learn from it and you can keep your wheels serviced and running for a long time to come. I've got two of these down. This is the third. There's no need to remove that anti-reverse dog. It's held on by a C-clip. If you find it's worn and needs replacing, you can certainly do that. No need to do it though. Basic services are just what we said. Take it apart, clean it. In this case, we found that there's a lot of sand in this wheel. Clean it. Inspect the pieces and parts, make sure that they're all working nicely, and then put it back together. All right. The point on that anti-reverse dog fits in the slot. One thing I didn't do on this, you test the bail. If the bail is working, you do not need to remove the bail. I just like to put a little bit of penetrating oil into the seams, work it back and forth. This is a very big reel, and this actually has an automatic trip to it. A lot of the reels that Penn and other manufacturers make in the 8,000 sizes, for sure, and larger, they go to a manual bail system. There's just a lot going on here, and my recommendation normally is if you don't mind, you'll prolong the life of your reel by flipping this manually as opposed to using the automatic trigger that hits the ramp. Alright, this is going to go back on. Hand tighten that. Heavy wrench. You don't want to crush strip that when it's going back on. Give it a spin, make sure that it spins nice and easy. It does. Let's take that collar, put that back on. That's to hold the nut from spinning off. Little taller tie down nut or screw. And the top end of the reel is essentially done. We've already done the drag washers. We've just done the rest of this. There seems to be 2 or 3 little grains of sand in there. That stuff is persistent. All right, let's go back underneath then and get this done. First thing we're going to do is lubricate the crosswind block. We've already done the work here in terms of cleaning it. Crosswind block gets grease everywhere. Grease on the teeth, grease on the face where I'm sorry, I call this the block, it's the gear. Back end where it's going to run against the case. Remember, I left the screw and the washer in there. If you took it out, go retrieve it now. Set that over and get that set down. Once you tighten that down, make sure that the gear is turning. Can lubricate our main gear. That would be next. You don't have to get grease on every tooth. This is a ratioed reel or a multiplying reel, so it will spread because the pinion gear is smaller than the main. It will spread. Both sides of this get the grease. Back end is the one that's going to drive your oscillation gear. We've already oiled the bearing on this other side. Seat that down properly. We want to take our crosswind block. Now on the crosswind block, you only need grease on the back end side. That's the only moving part area that's going to have any kind of friction with that. Seat that in the channel. Before I go any further, I want to take the time here with this rear drag system to show you how that works. Inside your main drag system here, there's 3 pieces actually. There's a washer that has the 2 slots in it. Let's see if I can pull that up and out. There's the cup, 2 slots. There's the spring that sits inside the cup. There's the metal washer with the 2 studs down. They fit in those 2 slots in that cup. That's the bottom end of your cup. We have a series of washers then. These all look new. And a click mechanism. That click mechanism has a little wing on it that goes there. On the other side of this, I'm not going to go all the way through. These are brand new washers apparently. On the other side of that, there's one more washer. And then there's the ratchet, which this is all sitting on, that is going to hold the axle shaft. Bring all of that together. You're going to notice on this piece now that there's 4 indentations. There's 4 indentations aligned with the 4 spacers on this side. So in order to get that in, you really have to lock it like that. That's locked now. We can bring this back in. By flush, I mean that the case is even on both sides here when the assembly is fully inserted in there. You've got this part facing you. The other thing I like to do on this, that ratchet is going to need to be lined right with the slot here. We'll get that in a moment. Okay, next up then is the axle shaft. Make sure that you wipe your axle shaft down. Grab a light coating of grease. Anything more than that is going to get scraped off as you go to insert. Notice that your axle shaft has a rectangular bottom to it. We're going to bring that through the top. The next up is bring it through your crosswind block. And then make sure that it merges into the ratchet down below. Remember those little slots. You want to see those slots next. You need a slot high and low. Then we have our little carrier, the clamp. It's got a U shape. The U is going to face down on you. Insert that one to each side. Close the gate. And sometimes you need to push in to make sure you have full clearance for that screw. Screw goes next. Usually I drop this screw in the case as I'm trying to put it together. Looks like I got lucky this time. Okay. That's all done. Next up then is the case. We've already oiled the pieces here. Simply turn it over. I think we can use that kitchen scrubby with the cleaner on it before we put it back under. So while I'm doing this, I'm reading. This has got a 5.3 to 1 gear ratio, 44 inches per turn. It's 4+1 ball bearings. We've kind of seen all of them. Let's put this back on. Find your stud. It's got to go through the case here. Put it on. Make sure you get a nice tight fit. Sometimes you need to swing the arm in and out to make sure that happens. Okay, nice and tight. We've got the 4 case screws here now. Since they're all the same size and same thread patterns, they're interchangeable with whatever position you want to put those in. Remember, they all have those little washers on them. Oops. Just as I say that, I noticed one of them just fell off here. I think it belongs to the one I just picked up there. That's an additional water seal. It's right here. As I mentioned, they're transparent. They're hard to see. Now we get that one back on. All right. We're getting close. So don't be afraid of bait feeders. There's some of them out there I guess you should be more afraid of, though, or more skeptical about. This one's got a straightforward design to it. You need to take pictures. Take lots of pictures if you're working on a bait feeder, because there's a lot of different designs on how that mechanism trips, and a lot of different ways that those springs can be located or go disappearing, if you will. Okay. 2 more of these. Sometimes I'm asked about mechanical screwdrivers. These are kind of hard to turn. It gets hard on your hands. If you want to use a mechanical screwdriver, make sure that you go slow and that you do not fully tighten it down with that screwdriver. Leave the last little bit for a hand turning and tightening. I've seen wheels come in with cracked cases because somebody got overzealous with those screwdrivers. All right, that sets there. Next up then is this other lever. Before I go there, since it's easier to kind of clean a wheel while it's got that lever off, let's go do that. Align your little rectangular section there. It should match up right to the side here, like that. Let's grab that screw that goes back in here. And we're getting close to a final test. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, I want to encourage you to subscribe. If you're still with me here and you haven't subscribed, you probably like the idea of the videos. I would encourage you to subscribe, and if you do subscribe, use that notification button. That'll tell you when I'm posting, and you'll be able to see if that's a video you would like to watch. I work on all kinds of fishing reels. Today it's a bait feeder for saltwater or deep water fishing. Tomorrow it might be a bait caster for bassing, and the next day it might be a vintage reel. We just never know. You have shim washers on here that controls the spool height This one is a braid ready spool. It does have that little elastic band on the inside. That's to prevent braid slip. We've already showed you how to service the drag washers. Go ahead and put this back on. This has got a pretty good seal to it. Yes, I didn't. There we go. Alrighty. Tighten that down. Make sure that your drag washers are holding. And once you know that it's holding, we're going to do a test, but once you know that they're holding, back that off. You saw the grease we put on there? You don't want to squeeze all that grease out. If you keep that drag knob adjusted all the way down, you're going to squeeze it out and compress those washers over time. It'll act like a vise. There's another piece I want to put a little oil on, that little small handle there, and we'll bring this around and we'll give it a test. We'll see how we did. Okay, everything's back together again. We showed you how to take this reel apart. We explained to you the fundamentals of reel service, which is to take it apart, clean it, inspect it, replace any worn parts, re-lubricate it, put it back together again. So there we are. All right, let's give it a ride. Oh, it's running beautiful. Nice and quiet reel. Let's go into bait feeder mode. You pull that down for live liner. That will release your spool to allow the line to go out. Click it, it'll throw it back, it'll lock the spool in place, and now you're controlled by the top drag. Alright, I'm going to just back this off now because we mentioned that you don't want to compress those. Well, I hope that's been valuable to you. Before I leave, I want to thank our first responders, our police, fire, safety, rescue, and everybody involved in keeping us safe. I appreciate all of your efforts and your dedication to the career in public safety. I want to thank you all for watching, for making this channel what it is, and for helping it to evolve over time to provide you what you'd like to see, as well as the information you need to service your reels. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, wishing everybody a great day.